Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Elden Ring of extreme metal podcasts. Yes, I have it now, and yes, I am playing it. I am the death metal guy, aka I was never a big fan of As I Lay Dying until I found out that Tim tried to get his wife murdered, and after that I was like, oh, these tunes are pretty good.
And I am the black metal guy, aka power stancing quad morning stars in Elden Ring.
Is that a new game plus? You get 4 arms?
Yeah, you just sort of spin around.
It makes navigating the menus even more difficult.
You spin around until you run out of stamina and get just wrecked.
You know, just like from my experience so far, I'm not super far in, but dude, running out of stamina almost never happens in this game compared to older Soulsborne stuff.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
you're not doing Dex, are you?
No, I mean, well, Dex doesn't increase stamina anyway.
No, it doesn't. But you might put points into stamina.
No, I'm playing warrior. You know, I'm two-handing an axe. You know, manning that shit. Just rolls, no blocking whatsoever, and I'm almost never running out of stamina. It's like surprisingly generous compared to a lot of the other games.
Yeah,
I feel
it seems I don't have it yet, but you know I've got to get a fucking game system. But it seems like a great game, but it definitely seems like they made it easier. You know, fucking horse as well.
There's definitely bosses that are as tricky as anything else, but I would say in general, it's like, okay, we're trying to reset. We're trying to make this a little bit more approachable for the average person, which is, I mean, that's fine. You know,
it's totally fair. It's kind of like, the way I would see it is it's like a band does like, I mean, God, the guy made like the different iteration. He works like a black metal band, right? He's made, since Demon Souls, he's made 4 different, although I guess he wasn't really doing DS2, but there have been 4 different versions of the same kind of game, and each of them like extremely rigorous and minimalist and demanding. And it's like, okay, you've mastered your craft, now you're finally gonna make a record with all the big epic riffs on it and a massive production, and everyone's gonna love it. It's like, fine, you earned it, man.
Yeah, it's not a cold lake, it's a monotheist, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah, exactly.
No, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, monotheist is all bangers, man.
Oh, monotheist is the best Celtic Frost album.
That actually might, in terms of what I've listened to the most and is the most objectively enjoyable, that might be true.
Yeah, I also got to see them like touring off that album, which was
the riff
incredible.
Structures on 2 Megatherion are crushing, but the production really, it just makes it less fun to listen to than it could be. You know what I mean? Like if you watch if you watch shit of them playing live, it sounds obviously better. You know?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you know, all those guys around that era were suffering from having to deal with rock producers. You know.
That makes sense, because if they just kept the Hellhammer, they probably thought the Hellhammer production was terrible. But if they'd kept that, Celtic Frost would have been heavier.
Oh, you just wish everything sounded like Hellhammer. You know.
Okay, you got me. Speaking of black metal insanity, we've got a pretty gnarly show for you guys tonight, and it is the first time in the history we're going to be going from the really inaccessible to the somewhat more accessible to the somewhat more accessible over the course of the episode. And for once, the goregrind record is the most accessible record.
Yeah, it's a very strange setup tonight. This is, we've been covering a lot of records lately that are kind of bigger records that maybe people are familiar with. This is maybe the last gasp for a little while of just shit that is totally unintelligible to most people, you know.
I feel like we're both having pretty sort of stressful weeks, and it's I'm feeling very hostile, so this show reflects it.
Well, what have you got to start us off with then?
All right. Well, we're going to open the show with the return of a of a late OO's early teens Blogspot legend with Ahulabrum. This is the sort of shit that I was aware of but didn't really listen to back in the day. That is because, to me at the time, black metal was about, demons with swords and Vikings with battle axes and demons with battle axes and Vikings with swords, right? It had to be about those things. And Ahulabrum was about UFOs.
Yeah.
And UFOs and, cryptids, like Mothman. And, to me at the time, it scanned as, oh, well, this must be kind of a just deliberately goofy, weird gimmick thing, blah, blah, blah. But it's... And so it wasn't... I didn't seek it out. But this is the kind of stuff that Cosmic Hearse, in particular, helped popularize. But it really was this very niche, insane subgenre of black metal, right? But, now that everyone's fucking, listening to... Now that Grausamkeit is a canonical Norwegian second language, right? The hour of Ahulabrum has rolled around at last. I was obviously my sense of what black metal can be is, broadened considerably. And, it's also funny that I never checked out this band because I've always been really into cryptid shit.
Yeah.
There's been a new run of releases from this guy. And I was drawn to this one in particular because I've been listening a lot to an excellent sort of folk anthropological podcast called Bigfoot, Sasquatch Chronicles. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but highly recommended. It's just a regular dude, interviewing the hundreds and hundreds of people who say they've seen Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I've had that on the brain, and this has a big ol' Sasquatch on the cover. And it is titled Strange Lights Portend Their Presence on Nebular Carcoma Records, on tape, of course. And I saw this posted on the Rites of Pestilence channel. The Ärid was posted. He did the first YouTube upload of that too. That's the next thing we're covering. It's a good channel. I think in terms of, I should plug his channel in the sense that I think he consistently uploads stuff that I really like probably more than any other one channel. Anyway, so what this is the kind of black metal so noisy that it's not on Metal Archives. Mm-hmm. And never has been. I've seen people saying that this is the harshest thing he's ever done. And the interesting conceit of it here is that he's taken the electronic aspect of it very seriously. So there's guitars, there's keyboards, but every percussion sound you hear is a sampled Bigfoot wood knock. This is supposedly a thing they do. They make strange knocks on trees as a mode of communicating. And people record these sounds and sometimes attempt to communicate with them by making wood knocks, right? Which can lead to some goofy shit. But people claim they hear weird shit. People claim they hear very big beasts banging on trees a lot. And so wood knocks and the vocals are all sampled Sasquatch howls. And a sampled 911 call from a very confused man in Kitsap Peninsula, Washington, 1996.
Yeah, we don't. We just recently, I don't know what it was, whatever it is, it's running. My
I mean, it's neat. I mean, it's so far that stuff that I would expect from like a 2000s like CDR thing. But I mean, it's cool. I mean, I like noise and I like black metal. So, I mean, it's neat. I mean, I do appreciate, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we get to the next record, I really do appreciate this new wave of, like, raw black metal. So I guess Ahulabrum isn't new, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But this wave of raw black metal stuff that is coming out that is not raw tape black. It's 2000s raw CDR black. You know?
That's something that we'll return to, yeah. But, like, on the show, we've spent a lot. People have probably heard us complain about "quote unquote" raw tape black, and the idea that the term raw black metal has become kind of meaningless, right?
Yeah.
Take some candy riffs and some uninspired, maybe some uninspired dissonant fumbling, and just put an artificially remote, echoey production on it and call it raw, right?
Just throw the distortion patch over the master channel in your DAW.
Yeah. And you know, like, and put some, like, colorful cover on it or some shit. But, like, yeah, so we're unimpressed by what that term means these days, but both of us really liked stuff that was called raw black metal back in the day, right?
Yeah.
It meant something very different. This is absolutely what that meant back in the day, like, to the extreme. It wasn't cool. It was antisocial and profoundly eccentric, right? And very aggressive. And yeah, so what do you make of the 911 call? Also, could you hear what was going on?
Bits and pieces. I do like what you wrote in the notes. So wait for when the dispatcher says, "Uh-oh."
Yeah.
I picked up on that. That was great.
She's continually trying to say, like, wait, this is a person? And he's like...
Not sure. Yeah.
No, it's like this weird sort of thing where neither of them can admit that they know what they're talking about. Yeah. So the guy who's seeing it is like, if I tell her I'm seeing Sasquatch, they're never going to send a cop out here.
Yeah.
Big guy. He's like 6 foot something. And he's probably trying to say he's 8 feet tall. And she like, wait, so it's a person? And then she says, because she goes like, uh-oh. She knows what he's seeing. But neither of them can say it. Oh, man. That's a great call, Dave. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, one thing he does is he makes it kind of like a searchable index of strange encounters, so his song titles always gesture to a specific sighting or event, or very often do. So you can, like, look up the Kitsap Peninsula sighting. But now we've got another representative track. We're just going to do very short samples from two others. This one is Artsuri, Forest Demons.
This is constructed a lot more like noise music. This is definitely on the noise side of the black noise thing.
Yeah, you can kind of see why it's not on Metal Archives. Although I think the old records did sound more like black metal. I think this is supposed... I mean, I'm just basing this on... Rites of Pestilence says it's without a doubt one of Indrid Cold's most bizarre and formless endeavors, almost stripped down of its raw black metal elements and getting into pure noise and ambient. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is one of the most noise things he's done.
Yeah, I can see that, because this resembles more like sort of like ritual ambient meets harsh noise stuff that I've listened to.
Yeah, if there's anything that's kind of like, this was a thing that I remember. I think I'd probably like it more now. Do you remember the brief buzz around Wold?
Yeah, Wold was a lot more sort of like digital and contemporary in a way, though.
Like, so do you think, so these sounds are, you mean as opposed to just like weird, like blown out Casio sounds? What do you think this guy's using for his production? It says guitars, keyboards, and vocals and drums. Do you think most of the noise is guitar noise and like keyboard distortion?
There's, so, I mean, just from listening to these little samples, okay, so there's like probably one or two quote unquote riffs per sample, and they're just like two ugly chords grinding against each other. But they're so blown out with distortion that it doesn't really matter at a certain point. And then, I mean, so you've already said, okay, so the percussion is like the wood knocking and the vocals are samples from Sasquatch. So most of this is based off of sampling more than playing traditionally. Yeah. So I think this is, in a lot of ways, more of a noisy texture exercise than it is, songs as we think of them on the show.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the riff on this track was... Could you hear the wood knocks?
Yeah.
I couldn't really make them out distinctly when I first listened to this because I thought they were going to be turned into blasting. But it's actually just this like deeper sound that's behind the fuzz.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's not really there to provide a coherent rhythm. They're just kind of like copy pasted almost at random.
Yeah, it would be kind of cool if one had made them into drum sounds, but I think the idea is to actually more evoke the sound of hearing them in the woods.
Well, if you want that, then you go back to Tomb and Retafruo, and you get that.
Word. Well, finally, we've got a slightly somewhat different mood and texture, and this one has, I think, more audible Squatch sounds on it. This is September 1st, 1973, Youngstown, Pennsylvania. Wasn't that a Bruce Springsteen show?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's where I was conceived.
Yeah. Okay, I think so. These are samples from that Bruce Springsteen show.
Okay, now I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the most musical. Why did you like it?
Oh, just as as a guy who probably listens to more like noise and power electronics than you, it's
for sure you do. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you see, I'm never sure because it's like you listen to all this like industrial stuff that's flirting around the edges, and it's like But as far as
we've said before, together we cover all industrial-based music, but to like different. There's like delicate places of overlap and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really like So, like wall noise stuff is not something I'm that into. I can appreciate, interesting textures and sounds and stuff, but ultimately, unless you're very autistically focused on that sort of thing, it gets dull for most people. But
I think it's about the live show.
Yeah, and live, that shit's really cool. But listening to it on record, it doesn't do anything for me. Yeah. But listening to this, it's like, okay, so we've got cool textures, cool tones, interesting rhythmic stuff. The weird channel switching between left and right I really like a lot.
Yeah.
It's just, it gives me a little bit of that vibe of like, okay, so we've got a noise guy, but he's got a kind of broad palette of ideas that he's working with. It's still fundamentally like noise music, but the way it's executed is not just Merzbow type stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, the channel switching is cool. It's like wood knocks from the left, wood knocks from the right. Time to leave. It's if as far as stuff, the kind of industrial or noise-ish stuff that I listen to, you were right to say the ritual industrial type stuff. This does sound, especially this track more than the other two, sounds like Ten Horned Beast, where he's making a lot of the music is based on like deliberately wandering anti-musical bass drone. Like there's sort of changes in notes, but it's like Sun, but like a lot freer, and there's all this other industrial stuff happening around it. So this is kind of like that, just big blown out bassy string textures plus this kind of textural overlay. But this is way raw.
Yeah, certainly. And I like, I like the, okay, so like I was saying earlier, so you really read this more as like noise and electronic music than black metal. However, there is a core of, you know, even as primitive and simplified as it is, there is a core of sort of black metal riffing across these songs. It's sort of like the most primitive mutilation riffs or something. And you know what they say about men with big feet, right? Big riffs.
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
And we are back from talking about DMT, DXM, and contact with an indifferent beyond to bring you Ärids from Anthropophagic waste breeds a writhing mutagenesis. God, I mangled that.
Do you want the goregrind guy to pronounce it for you?
Goregrind guy, go.
From Anthropophagic waste breeds a writhing mutagenesis.
There you go. That one, it took me by surprise, man. I thought it'd be easy, and it wasn't easy. But yeah. So that's out on Death Hymns, which is a label we've recently mentioned. Because
we've covered a few things from Death Hymns over the past like year or so, right?
So we just did Gates of Dawn. What other stuff have we covered from them?
Ooh, man, I would have to go back through the notes, but I feel like, was the Gerda a Death Hymns?
Oh, probably. Okay, so that makes sense. This is just one. So the next thing I was going to say that this is a Danny Filth tier patron request / recommendation, and it's from one dude, Desert Plague, who has also requested the Gates of Dawn and the Gerda. So he just really likes this label. And he wanted to hear what we thought of this one. Yeah, so I said, yeah, we'll check it out.
Yeah, and this was weird because I had actually stumbled across this on YouTube, and I had kind of like earmarked this to put on an episode where we needed like a ringer because I thought it was interesting. So we both arrived at this without knowing that, you know.
Yeah. And it's really good.
Yeah.
I think we both like this one a lot.
I like this one a lot, dude.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to repeat listen to this. This is, you know, I think we would both consider this pretty fun.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's also like legitimately sinister.
Yeah. Yes, it's very serious music that ends up also being highly kinetic and engaging.
It manages it manages to be mosh pit music, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll get into that. So this is we brought it up already with the Ahulabrum, right? But I guess a theme for that and for this is our love of the old raw black metal as opposed to the stuff that's popular now. And this is a perfect example of that. What this has is the old rawblack sound has, how would you describe... So the guitar tone on this record, right, is sort of, the Norse bands, the necro sound, you could describe as aggressively dead, right? You'd sort of scoop the mids, but the guitar tone is still up in front, solid. It has this kind of hungry buzz to it, or this cutting edge to it, right? The cold edge, right? The early 2000s, like, rawblack sound it has more in common with the necro sound than with whatever fucking modern rawblack tone is like.
Yeah.
But it's distinct, in part because there's more white noise. How else would you describe it? This guy's guitar, he's sort of not just scooped out mids, but it really, the way his tone sort of puts the timbre up front and the tonality in the back.
I would say, like, as far as the stuff we're talking about, like 2000s rawblack stuff, the kind of CDR shit, I've always associated the production style with doing raw black metal with the earlier kind of consumer available, or like metal consumer available digital recording. So those like flat, ugly distortion tones, those like DI tones, that they kind of, in a sense, turned into a style of its own. It's like, okay, so there is no depth. It's a flat plane of tone and noise. I think this guy in Ärid kind of embraces that. Obviously, it's better produced. There's more of an idea here. But you definitely get the sense of like, those CDR guys back in the day, it's like, let's just stack 3 of these like included distortion plugins with our digital audio workstation on top of each other, and let's just play through that.
A thing, I guess a thing you could say is that, you could say, okay, the necro sound is different from nowadays stuff because it's loud. This stuff is different from the necro stuff because it's extremely loud. Has much more. I think fuzz is something that's not orange amp fuzz tone, but harsh, fried white noise fuzz. That is a distinctive
fried
feature
is a really good word.
Yeah.
For this whole style, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, lots of just, it's, everything is in the red in a way that it's not necessarily on a Dark Throne record. As far as musical paradigms for this whole network of stuff, one, and for this band in particular, one would be Dark Throne, but Dark Throne not as the fun, punky uncles or as the Transylvanian Vampires, but Dark Throne as a really serious minimalist avant-garde band. Right. So, like, last 2 tracks of Under a Funeral Moon and A Blaze in the Northern Sky minus all the fun parts.
Yeah, minus In the Shadow of the Horns, yeah.
Yeah, no cowbells, no mosh calls. Not that, I mean, those parts are great. We all love those parts. But, this is the parts of A Blaze in the Northern Sky that if you'd heard it in 1992 would have made you fall out of your chair.
Yeah.
This is very influenced by that kind of frenetic energy, a black metal that is not distinct from grindcore. And that's a very central thing on this record. It grinds really hard throughout. Yeah. We've, in terms of other big reference points for this, I think we've both got some old classic bands we could throw out there. I mean, I think we both hear this being connected to the Rusty Axe Records bands.
Oh, absolutely. This is closer to Rusty Axe than almost anything I've heard in the past 10 years.
And that was a sort of American rawblack label that had a bunch of kind of really vicious bands with a redneck aesthetic.
They were out of like Southern Virginia, and they were just. It was just like fucking asshole music, It was just like mean and sadistic and way too blown out, and it was awesome. It was it was a point in time that you can't get back to.
Yeah, the band a time when people who now like raw black metal avoided it.
Yes, exactly.
They wore gas masks, and camo pants. And they had and their second album was entitled Hung Again Like a Bitch.
Oh, you're thinking of Raw Hatred, that band.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to name the band.
Yeah,
Raw Hatred is the one I listened to the most.
Oh, man, I remember talking to Andy from Rusty Axe Records. He had sent me a back patch from Raw Hatred. So how's this for, like, old school, well, fake old school metalhead cred? He sent me, at one point, we were trading shit back and forth. He sent me a back patch of Raw Hatred, and he said, only like 10 or 15 of these were made. The guy who was doing these patches ended up murdering his wife, so they're just like done. So take one of them.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was that vibe.
Yeah.
And this is, it's like not to be like cool guy or anything, but back in the day it was just like, oh, that's fucked up. All right, whatever. Sick.
Yeah, no, that was what it was like. You still have that patch, man?
Dude, I've been looking for it. I don't know where it disappeared to because I want it. Because I will make a patch fest just to put that on my fucking shit. But, no, so yeah, Rusty Axe Records, stuff
that was super punk, but not in a way that the punk scene would want anything to do with. Right.
It was extremely punk at the time, but I think that would be unrecognizable to people now.
Yes, and extremely punk in terms of the approach and the spirit, rather than like having punk parts that you could take apart. And you could say the same thing about the Ärid. There is none of the things that, if you hear a nowadays band drawing on these strains of Darkthrone or trying to do really loud, raw black metal, the closest thing I can think of would have been, off the top of my head, would have been a pretty good band from the Vrasu Batlat scene, it's not a scene I like a lot at all, but there was a very good sort of stompy raw black band called Urzite. But they had all these punkisms in it, right? They had like this sort of, you could hear the stompy, mysterious guy stuff and the crust stuff throughout it, and emphasis on the parts of Darkthrone and whatever that sounded the most punky. This kind of stuff this record we're reviewing and the kind of tradition we're referring to, all of the punkishness is just in how the music is played.
Yeah, just loose and ugly. It's... Well, I want to touch on a couple things before we get into samples. So the first thing that I kind of talked about it a little bit with the Ahulabrum. So we've got this new wave in a sense of like pseudo old school raw black metal, sort of like it feels almost like a response to Instagram raw tape black.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's dudes our age or maybe a little bit older who are like sick of this shit.
Yeah, who want to do shit that's actually ugly again, not just pretty with a filter of ugliness over it. We've played a few things like that on the show over the past year or so. There was the Gerda Blulu record, which Desert Plague also had us feature, and then there was that what was that, a Vial of Putrid Hockle? That was that EP by, who was that again?
Vial of Putrid Hockle. Oh, wait. Oh, that's Odious Hiss. Yeah, I really liked that one.
There was Odious Hiss. So we've listened to those, and there's probably one or two more that have trickled in. And all of those things have been cool, but the sort of question underneath it for me has always been, okay, these are cool tones, these are cool ideas, these are cool sounds. How do we get, like, a real band out of this, How do we get something that creates a platform for more stuff, that isn't just kind of an exercise in the way that maybe a noise record is or something? The answer is this album. This, as far as this style goes, this is the best thing we featured on the show. I'm going to listen to this more in the future. I'm really excited to see what this guy comes out with, after this. These are real songs. Like, this is not just a sort of stylistic exercise. This is a band, I know it's just one guy, but you know what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, it's well, that's an impressive thing. It's a one-man project that sounds like an actual band, right?
Yeah.
You have two wolves living inside of you. One plays guitar, the other plays drums. You are an alcoholic.
And that might be part of what makes this really cool, is that I think I suggested it in the notes, but I think I've come to the conclusion this is a drummer band.
Oh, absolutely is. Let's talk about that after the sample, because it's a drummer band that's not like the other drummer bands.
Yes.
Man. So, just to underscore how sick that was actually 2 tracks. That was all of Sculptured Corpse Artifact into Black Hematomesis. Sculptured Corpse Artifact is the one with the very, maybe like we heard 2 riffs, very continuous chord wall riffs, tremolo chord wall stuff. Very, very dissonant. One thing that separates him from disso-black bands is that in this tradition, you are not using dissonance to generate quote-unquote atmosphere, aka nothing. You're using it to generate force.
You're using it to generate riffs.
Yeah, and that too. Yes, they are riffs. The riffs work like power chord riffs. They're just hideous power chords. The next track basically is the first one is basically the build to the next track. Black Hematomesis is like the release to Sculptured Corpse Artifact. And in Black Hematomesis, it's when it locks into this sort of insane looping, cycling series of riffs, like the one I was just humming there. And I think what he does is he lays on a bunch of blast beats, and then at the end of the phrase, the dunga 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 dunga, It it's basically like he's playing a really fast D beat for just like half a bar or something. And so it creates this like pulsed beat that's really dynamic, and there's just intense compression and then driving ahead, intense compression, and then just banging your head between two walls. It sounds nothing like Confuse, but it really reminds me of Confuse.
Well, it's because you're hearing a drum performance that has not been quantized to death. You know,
it's so cool. Yeah, there's a part in the middle of the Black Metamesis where like it seems like he skips a bar or something and just speeds up arbitrarily.
I think I was talking to you when that happened. I was like, "There's a really cool sort of snare kick inversion that happens there very briefly." It's like this is a guy who's a very good drummer. I don't know who this guy is. I'm guessing that he plays drums in other bands because he's just like
he must be coveted.
Because like the vibe that I get is like, okay, this is a sophisticated drummer and he has a rawblack project and he does these songs in like one take, you know, because these feel like single takes, these songs. To me.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good guy, like a really talented guy on drums who does like a single good take. If there's little mistakes, he leaves them in, but overall he's better than most of the guys attempting this.
Yeah, and so the nature of drummer band this is, right? Like the normally we use the phrase on the show to refer to like a drummer decides to do everything himself, and so he creates the kind of music that would be really fun for a drummer to play, hypothetically, which is usually spastic. There are lots of different parts in the songs, constant tempo changes and transitions, and often what happens is he approaches guitar in the way he approached the drums, right? Just to be even a competent extreme metal drummer, you have to be a virtuoso, basically. Or you at least have to have certain technical skills just maxed out, right? And so you approach guitar like that, and you become an extremely prolific guitarist, or proficient guitarist, right? So the classic example for this is like Sunopfer, the sort of French, I think he plays in Peste Noire, is the drummer, and it's a sort of French, it's an early chivalric black metal band, and the songs just have too many riffs. There are too many good riffs. They disintegrate because there are too many riffs. This is kind of schizo drummer band. Or another example of a drummer band that does this in a more coherent, better way would be Rites of Thy Degringolade, where you just have really weird, intense guitar. This guy is writing. He's not like, it's not like a drummer's ideal band. It's a drummer consciously employing drums as the main instrument in the band and making it taking a disciplined approach to the guitar, right? The drums are the center of the music. He's not interested in doing anything flashy on guitar. He's also not remotely interested in breaking out of the paradigms of sort of hypnotic repetition-based power music, right? This is based on long repeating blocks of stuff, but he's going to use the drums to create incredible dynamism within those long blocks. He'll play the same riff 16 times and it never sounds grid-written. And that's in part because there's this pulsating, insistent movement and play on the drums. And he's written the riffs with this in mind. And we've heard things like this at different times on the show, but the guitar riffs are stripped down, and the tone is diminished in favor of the timbre. It's mostly the buzz, and it's just this shaped continuum that's being punctuated and driven by the drums. Yeah, it's just it's like the drums are playing guitar.
Yes.
Right? You can hear that. Yeah.
The primary musical figure is delivered on the drums.
And yet the guitar parts are sick, in part because they are disciplined and understated.
And they're removed from the standards of heavy metal guitar.
Absolutely. This is a good example of this is a good example of black metal that is not heavy metal.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of which, let's get to one of my samples, because so I think a primary influence to this is going to be Havohe, actually, because
that makes sense.
Havohe is Paul Ledney's solo project, and the drumming on this seems very clearly Paul Ledney inspired. These sort of like abrupt, constant fills, coming like earlier than you would expect in the bar. The overall kind of noisy black metal aesthetic.
When I come earlier than I would expect in the bar, I have to go home.
Yeah, usually when you come earlier expected, you're undisciplined, but here it's very disciplined. But I think so. I think the Havohe here is like the weird section of releases between Dethrone the Son of God and Combatant and Premaster. Once you get to Combatant and Premaster, you get into it's basically like industrial music via black metal. But then there's this weird series of like demos and EPs and little 7-inches and stuff where he's kind of playing around with the ideas. I think that's an influence here. Shit like Purple Cloak. Nobody listens to Purple Cloak, but this guy does. Also, what's interesting is, so we've listened to that really fast stuff. The other half of this record, so to speak, is very doomy, very but like almost funeral doom, like deliberately minimal. Like certain tracks are like basically torture doom tracks in a sense, just like a little bit too fast. So I want to listen to one of those. I want to listen to the intro couple minutes of "Enthrone My Corpse to the Putrefaction of Time and Flesh," and I've talked about drums. Let's listen to this. Let's talk about guitar a little bit afterward. So obviously the centerpiece of that is the drumming, but I don't want to ignore the guitar work on this. So something weird that happens, and I don't know if it's just an effect of the songs changing or if there's a real thing going on, but it feels like the guitars get clearer as the album progresses. It could just be maybe the riffs are a little bit more defined and clear, but I get the sense that this became more listenable the further on we went. And here, what's really cool is this is a standout example of, okay, so we're doing the rawblack thing, But what is ultimately going on in the guitars? A lot of it's like pretty traditional, like US black metal stuff. Like there's a lot of kind of Profanautica, kind of the doomy parts of Profanautica. There's Judas Iscariot stuff littered around the record. A lot of this is just kind of straight Von grinding shit. I think that's really cool. Obviously it's a noisier exercise in these ideas, but ultimately, if you pare this down to just the notes that are being played, a lot of this is traditional US black metal from the early 90s.
Well, those are much cooler reference points than what I was about to say, which is that this sounds like a Darkthrone song. This specifically, in terms of really hard tracks off Under a Funeral Moon, this also sounds a lot like, this track in particular sounds like To Walk the Infernal Fields.
You see, I was going to describe this as like an even more retarded version of like Unholy black metal, slowed down.
Oh, that one's really fast though. When
the
witches ride, the demons ride the nuts.
Slow it down. You take the most retarded Darkthrone tracks and you strip them down to make the chords uglier.
No, but what that song? To Walk the Infernal Fields is slow and ugly.
Yeah,
and it has a profoundly slow, lurching power chord part, and then a sort of lower mid-tempo strut that just does the 1 minor 6 thing, the epic dum, right? And this really moves like that, but a thing that sets this apart in part is, well, A, the drum performance in general, B, when he does the strut riff, he's doing it in something like 7/4. The riff is looping on itself in a very strange way, and it works as a stomp. It has that driving Bathorian thing to it, but it's off kilter in a weird way.
And obviously real quick, the drum performance on that sample goes without saying. That's just fucking awesome. The constant sort of like running over itself, tom fills and shit. Again, very Ledney inspired, but even denser and more aggressive than he would do. It's fucking outstanding. I think definitely after hearing that, it's like this guy is a drummer first.
Yeah. I think what we're pinning down maybe is just the idea that, okay, if we had to think about central reference points for this, not just for this band, but for the sound we're tying it back to, if we think back to a lot of those, really that rawblack sound we're talking about was in many ways American. You could find examples of it from other countries. There's Deathchurch from Japan, who this reminds me of a lot, who have a similar kind of tone, anti-note guitar playing. It was an American style, and so it would make sense that the central influences really are just like Darkthrone and all the bands you just mentioned.
Because the central thing for like American raw black metal in like late 90s, early 2000s was just Darkthrone. Just like doing more retarded and noisy versions of Darkthrone songs.
Yeah. So it's like you take Darkthrone plus all the Ledney bands and Von, right? And you get you get the basis for this sort of thing. And those bands, one thing that those bands have in common with Darkthrone is, or with Darkthrone at its most extreme, is this kind of punkishness that doesn't sound like punk.
Yeah, which is a crucial distinction,
Yeah, and part of, that was the thing about the Scandinavian bands as well, in their own way, right? It's more overt with the Americans because it's even more stripped down. So we want to go on to your next one?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a fast one, too. So I would say this record actually is like 50-50 between really fast and pretty slow, doomy stuff.
Also, on a real quick parenthetical, the slow, doomy stuff on this I like a lot. And in that way, it's like a lot of, doing slow stuff on black metal records is kind of a lost art. And you know me, I've become more open to lower tempos since doing this show with you, but often that stuff does not land for me. I really like those parts on this record.
I would say, personally, that the slower stuff on this record is like that's where this band lives.
Oh no, I love the fast part.
I like the fast stuff, but I like it as sort of like interrupter, like short, grindy bridge tracks between these sort of like slow, ugly fucking doom things.
Okay, well, we actually disagree about that. However, I mean, I like the slow parts too.
Yeah, that's fair. But I want to play my favorite fast track on the record, which is the second to last, which is enhanced necromechanical in manifestation of septic blood and soil. This is my favorite fast track on the album. I think this is like the apex of the fast material. And here, I think you're going to hear, especially from guitar, a lot more clarity in the riffs, and you're going to hear more of that Judas Iscariot meets Dark Throne, but Dark Throne around like Transylvanian Hunger and Panzerfaust, like a little bit later than the Under a Funeral Moon stuff that defines a lot of this record. And, of course, it's a whole track, so let's do it. So yeah, that's really noisy and really extreme, but if you strip away some of the production excesses, you get something that's pretty similar to like early Judas Iscariot, like pre-Heaven in Flames, like Of Great Eternity or Thy Dying Light or something like that. It's noisy, it's intense, but ultimately, just note for note, this is not far off of traditional USBM. And I think that's one of the things that makes this band kind of special. You know, that it's integrated the incredibly intense standards of modern raw black metal, but it hasn't forgotten to write songs. And that almost feels like a little bit of a cop-out, because I love bands that don't write songs. You know, I love shit that's just as outside and noisy and insane as possible. But listening to a lot of bands in this general milieu, I've always been struck by, my sense has always been, I like these, like I said at the beginning, I like these sounds, I like these textures, but what are we doing with this? Again, here's the answer. We're going to make songs with it. We're going to make songs that you can remember, that have moments that you care about, that you're going to revisit. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's honestly kind of a path forward for this whole style.
Yeah, I mean, well, they're not... Maybe this is nitpicking, but these aren't like... They're not songs in the way that certain black metal bands write heavy metal songs. right?
But they're composed pieces with memorable ideas.
Yes, they're fully realized tracks. Each of them does a specific thing. Each of them is a sort of a process unto itself, and they're all part of a bigger process. And each one has sort of meaningfully related riffs in it and shit like that. Yeah, it's there's nothing arbitrary about it at all. And yeah, you can point to every. I guess maybe what you mean is you can point to every track and be like, oh yeah, it's that track. Right?
Yeah, which is, I love the idea of, like, internalizing the crazy kind of, like, noisy industrial stuff going on, but also incorporating that into, in a sense, more traditional songwriting.
That's something a lot of those early 2000s bands did really, I think, really well, that has been forgotten.
Yeah, well, because they were trying to do regular black metal, but they were poor. It was just like, okay, so I guess we're just going to do this, like, insanely harsh, white, noisy version of Darkthrone that we always wanted to do.
Yeah, so now let's go to I want to play two, like, a very quick sample and then a slightly longer one, just to show we were just talking about how, I guess that, your point segues really nicely, because these are all sort of, this one funny thing about this record, right? There's always a trollish quality to music like this, right?
Yeah.
And one aspect of it is it repeatedly signals to the listener that it might be over, and then it isn't. If someone made music, most bands making music this harsh today would keep the record at 25 minutes. Right? This is a fully realized 41-minute album, right? It's just like, hey, I heard you like raw black metal. I hope you do, bud. And it's like, yeah, you're still down, right? Okay, great. We've got 3 more tracks. And one way it makes that not just grueling, right? Not just like listening to Panzer Division Marduk 3 times in a row. Although, to come to think of it, I've probably done that. But one way it makes that not grueling, right, is that the tracks are a very varying length, right? Like, we've got much longer tracks, we've got much shorter tracks. They're paced in an interesting way, and then even riff placement works in a riff placement exists in structures that go beyond the individual track. So just like before, I played 2 tracks that sort of work as one track. In this case, there's riff stuff that happens in one that's picked up again in where was this? It's where's Sleep of Esoteric. Hang on, I'm looking at this fucking. Oh, yeah. Oh, I did. Okay, so in track 7, it's a slash track, so there are 2 parts to it. And the second part of track 7 is Sleep of Esoteric Preservation. So I'm going to sample a very little bit of that. And then I want to sample some stuff from the very last track, track 10. And shit that he gestures to on track 7 comes back on track 10 in an interesting and sophisticated way. So we're just going to listen to the very end of Sleep of Esoteric Preservation. Hey, did you hear that?
Yeah, sounded pretty cool.
Kind of an epic riff.
Yeah,
little bit. Too bad it immediately gets pulverized by the following track. Right? And so, right, right? I think what I wrote in my notes is snuffed into smoke by bubonic hyperblasts. But then, we get more tracks of, 2 more tracks of deafening noise, including the one that Death Metal Guy just sampled. And then we get into the last track, Enhanced Necromechanical in Manifest.
Nope, that was mine.
Wait, sorry, no, that was yours. Fuck, these song titles are confusing. Sulfurized gore and petrifaction enshroud my tomb as the burning twilight coalesces into waning abyss. Okay, so we get to that one. You're going to hear sort of a callback to that riff in a way.
Dude, that fucking ending riff on your sample, that big bend riff, is like that's the climax of the record. That is so fucking sick.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, right? So earlier, right, at the end of that other track, you heard this sort of 2-chord riff that had some of that sort of epic Dorian tonality to it. Here, right, this big just 2 really dense chords just swooping, bending up from one to the other. I think that's just a minor 6th kind of thing. It's a classic sinister epic Norse or Swedish type black metal riff, right? It's certainly a bit like Transylvanian Hunger or kind of Dark Funeral, or really like moments on. There are a couple moments on that Nidden record on Impergium where they. There are some really just solemn, noble parts where they'll just hit these 2 chords that are just kind of melancholy and powerful, and just then go back into the sort of strange dissonant stuff. So there's a kind of convention songwriting these days. Where if you're a band that's too tasteful to constantly do big quote-unquote triumphant riffs, right, which is a good thing, right? Particularly if you're a band doing anything that has a kind of classic Norwegian or Swedish vibe to it, or anything like that, right? You pull out the big epic riff at the end, right? There's a certain kind of indulgent, elaborate, maybe Dorian scale riff that you're saving to the end of the album, and then everyone gets it, they're like, oh, haha, yeah, right? Or you save the song that really sounds like Bathory or Blashirk Mighty Raven Dark for the end of the record, right? This band sort of plays on that expectation, right? You hear that little hint of a riff like this earlier in the song, and then just boom, gone, right? And by the end of the record, you think, okay, I'm not entitled to... You might be expecting some sort of big climactic riff, but by the end, you're like, I'm not entitled to that, right? Even the expectation of that has been completely pummeled away from you, right? It's just like, I hope you like raw black metal, bro. And then finally, they whip this out, and then you just get 2 bars of it. And it disappears, like the earlier riff, and then it just comes back as this, hypnotically repeated thing that rolls forever. And it's just 2 chords, and they have a ton of internal dissonance within both of them themselves. They're not like nice, pretty sounding chords, but in the context of a record this this disciplined, right? Just that change sounds massive. And it pops like the Crazy Train riff.
All right, we are back after an extended break talking about the politics of house parties with something that's kind of a big record, I guess, in a sense. It's the second Pharmacist full-length entitled Flourishing Extremities on Unspoiled Mental Grounds. Released now on Bizarre Leprous Productions, the greatest purveyors of everything ugly and grindy out there. So, Pharmacist is kind of an interesting band. It's a two-piece. We got one guy who is the kind of guitarist, bassist, vocalist, the everything else guy. Originally from Ukraine, located in Japan for several years now. And a drummer, in theory, maybe we'll talk about that, from Japan. So Pharmacist released their first full-length a couple years back, and it immediately got some attention. Honestly, black metal guy, when's the last time you heard of a sort of, quote-unquote gore grind band having any sort of clout or interest outside of that little scene?
Oh, God. Gore grind having any influence? I'm really drawing a blank here.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a long time. I think even me as a big gore grind guy, maybe it was Jigai.
I've heard the name Jigai. I mean, I've heard of a bunch of gore grind bands just because people outside gore grind probably this is ancient, right? Shit like Agathocles people know, right? Or, but that's old. That's a canonical band.
Yeah, Agathocles has just been around for 30 plus years.
There are those Ohio kind of Midwestern bong rip gore grind bands that were pretty popular for a minute.
Yeah, there's that. There's some of the West Coast stuff.
But I only know that because I used to follow the punk scene, right? So it's,
those are mostly punk guys doing gore grind. Yeah.
So those are the only ones I could name. I mean, gore grind band. It really is pretty hermetic, huh? I mean, Wormrot had a gore grind name, but the music was not at all.
Yeah, it's just straight grindcore, old school style.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a long time since anything quote unquote gore grind really made a splash.
Fans, let us know in the comments.
Yeah. Pharmacist did with their first record. This new record, Flourishing Extremities, is not really a gore grind record. I get the lineage it's coming from, but really what this is a very polished, very good, very direct and smart death metal record. So I listened to the first Pharmacist record when it came out. I liked it, but it wasn't really the style that I was really looking for, although it had a lot of enthusiasm and backing behind it, just in the metal scene. But it seemed to me that a lot of people that were really into it were guys that were outside of gore grind saying, oh, well, this is a gore grind record that I like. Well, that's because it has influences from a lot of stuff that's a lot more palatable, which is not to insult this, because this is very good music. I think this is a wonderful record, and I'm just glad to see this sort of gory style of death metal coming back on the map. I think we talked about that a little bit when we covered the 200 Stab Wounds record last year. The idea of, it sounds absurd, but what about death metal being about gore and murder again?
Yeah, well, and they're doing brutal death vocals, right? And certain kinds of aspects of that in the song structures, right?
Yeah, it's what if death metal and grind were actually about ugly, gory stuff again? Because you think of it as essential to the style. But it's actually been a while since bands like that have been kind of primary in the scene. So I thought it was cool to hear this. This is a really interesting record. We'll get into it more, but Black Metal Guy, what do you think about this one?
man, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, my immediate question for you was, this is goregrind?
I mean, that's a conversation unto itself.
Yeah, as far as first impressions, this is a very entertaining album. I listened to it yesterday, which was a very sunny day, and today, which was not. It lands better on the sunny day.
It's a sunny record. Yeah.
It's a sunny. This is
a good times record.
It's a good times record. It really is, like what I said to you is like, usually it's an insult if you say something should be on Nuclear Blast or Relapse, but this like should be on Nuclear Blast or Relapse. Like it's just, it has an incredibly polished sound, but it's the kind of thing that reminds you why so many people are drawn to kind of like big chunky mids. Mm-hmm. Very clean, big, chunky, digitally produced mids. They just sound really good here. It's got fantastic musicianship, which we'll get into, and the songs it's like really good mainstream extreme metal because it's still extreme metal. These aren't really hook-driven songs. There's some catchy riffs on every track, but they're not. They kind of have these. This is a big thing, right? They're 7-minute songs for the most part.
Yeah.
Right? And they have these kind of winding, highly sort of riff sequence-based song structures. So it really isn't structured like fun heavy metal. It's just very accessible because of how it's produced and because of a certain kind of and because of certain qualities in the riffs, which we'll get into. It's also, other question for you. I mean, so for me, I've like literally never listened to Carcass, right? That's and they're one of those bands that torpedoed their legacy so thoroughly that I wasn't even interested in going back to the early stuff. Just didn't seem like my kind of thing. What I assume this sounds like Carcass, right? Because I can hear that this is very melodic, kind of heavy metal-y stuff that certainly has some gory undertones in parts and some grindy parts. I assume this sounds like Carcass. Tell me more about that.
So, Carcass is a band that's very hard to pin down. There's been so many different eras and so many different ideas expressed by their music. Carcass is a very weird band to ask me about because it's like the band that I respect the most that I never listened to, basically. So the first two Carcass records are basically the blueprint for goregrind. Then you've got Necroticism, the third record, which is a wonderful sort of grind-tinged death metal record. And then you have Heartwork, which is possibly one of the blueprints for melodic death metal. Swan Song, wonderful sort of like death and roll, melodic death and roll record. And then disappear for a while, come back with Surgical Steel and following records, which is sort of a halfway point between Necroticism and Heartwork. So, death metal, little bits of grind, little bit of death and roll, very melodic tinge throughout it. Pharmacist sounds like newer Carcass. You've got a lot of those melodic elements, a lot of straight death metal stuff, and a little bit of like old school goregrind tucked away in fits and starts. But ultimately, this is a pretty straight ahead death metal record. But it's also, what I think is cool is that it's a death metal record in a style that is basically forgotten now.
So, can I raise a thing there?
Yeah,
another sort of question thing. So, a thing that, yes, it's definitely basically forgotten, right? This does not sound like any of the major strains of death metal these days. It has a little bit in common with the Maggot Stomp stuff, which I think maybe you'll bring up at a certain point, but it's like common DNA. So aside from Carcass, I assume this is kind of like the whole Earache family of bands, with grind bands becoming more like death metal. And what it reminds me of is a documentary I saw on YouTube years ago, and it was called like Grindcore or something. Grindcore documentary.
Oh, you're talking about that. You're talking about like the late 90s earache documentary.
No, I think this is, I think it's actually Grindcore Special Issue. Interview with Earache Records owner Digby Pearson, Jennifer Grubb, members of the following bands, 1991. This is free on YouTube. You can look it up. There's some good conversations with these bands.
Okay.
But if anything,
I'm thinking of a different one.
Yeah, they talk to like guys from Napalm Death, Morbid Angel, Nocturnal, Paradise Lost, Prophecy of Doom, Godflesh, Cerebral Fix, Sonic Violence, Bolt Thrower.
No, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, we're thinking of the same one. So the thing is, you may have noticed, almost none of the bands I just listed are grind bands, at least by conventional standards, by what we think of it now.
Yeah.
But back in the 90s, there was some confusion about that. And not confusion, right? They just didn't neatly distinguish between these things yet.
That was interesting.
You could almost call this whole documentary post-crust or something, like former crust bands playing more extreme music. A lot of it, aside from Nocturnus and Morbid Angel.
I remember watching this documentary on old school Netflix where you had to order the DVDs.
That's awesome. So this has been on YouTube for a while. So basically what you conceive it is they do not neatly distinguish between death metal and grind. If anything, I think there may have been sort of a cultural politics to it, a branding thing. Because if you look, bands from the punk scene didn't want to be called death metal. Like, that there's that hilarious axe grinder thing where they say, not death metal, peace metal. And, like, Winter in their liner notes has, like, a rant about how they're not a death metal band. So it may have been some kind of branding thing as well. But, like, there's this entire family of bands who today we put silo off in different genres, who are all being related to this grindcore phenomenon back in 91. And so this record Pharmacist seems to pull on that a lot.
Yeah, I think so. And with that, let's listen to a sample. So we're not just talking amongst ourselves forever. Are we just going in?
Oh, sorry. For some reason, I assumed you were going to go to a sample, but let's go to mine then.
You got the first one.
Okay, so I've got one from the first track. So at the beginning, we got some blasts. We've got some gargling vocals. Maybe kind of what you would expect so far. And then about a minute and 25 into accelerating suppuration, you start to get parts where you're like, oh, this isn't normal death metal. Or at least as we've come to know it.
this is we talk a lot on this show about what people imagine who don't listen to metal when they hear the term death metal. This is like the good version of that. You know, this is like the kinder version of that.
Yeah. I mean, so listening to that, we would say that's an industrial metal riff or a groove riff. It sounds like Sepultura. But back in the day, when Chaos AD came out, a lot of people sort of thought of that as a death metal record, right?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean,
it's hard to understate how much of a no-no that particular kind of disco industrial beat is in a death metal context these days, and that's something that links it to the kind of no taboos spirit of goregrind.
Yeah, and it's also like that would come directly from Carcass around that era I'm talking about. Necroticism, Heartwork. Like they really kind of cast off the shackles. I'm not going to say that every decision they made was great. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're excellent records. I'm not going to like sit here and be like, oh no, Carcass wasn't that good. No, they actually were that good. It's not my style a lot of the time, but it's objectively excellent. And a lot of this is derived off of those ideas. But instead of them being like, shaking off kind of an idea of death metal, this is using that as a platform to build off of. Like some of these like almost boogie rock things happening. Like there's this wonderful section like a third of the way through that sample where you're getting into a riff that's doing like a syncopated sort of upstroke variation, which is like a crazy, like totally anti-heavy metal thing to do. Like it's almost like a first Iron Maiden record thing to do. But a lot of this record is defined by the things outside of death metal that it's accessing, right?
Oh, King Crimson.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of prog.
There's a ton of prog. Interval... who knows if it's actually King Crimson, but the basic interval choices for the guitar, he's using this kind of like... I don't know how to describe it other than kind of like open whole step guitar kind of stuff. Sometimes it sounds kind of pentatonic, sometimes it sounds a little more major or minor, but he's really emphasizing these kinds of wide intervals in... sort of unexpected ways, right? And that and even the rhythm, like that's a really King Crimson kind of thing to do.
Yeah, this whole record has a sort of.
I feel like, but sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was just going to say this whole record has a sort of prog inflection, because one of the ideas that I had listening to this was this feels like a guy who has classical training behind him, this doesn't feel like just a totally homegrown self-taught guitarist in the metal scene. This guy has like little details of like neoclassical and jazz and blues that I don't think you would typically hear, but he's incorporating it really well into the whole.
You have, another daring thing, right? You do vocals for a minute, right? Vocals and aggressive blasting for a minute, and then just for 2 minutes the vocals drop out, and you're trading between like verboten groove riffs and guitar solos for 2 minutes.
That was actually something I thought of listening to this record, which is like, was this originally supposed to just be instrumental? Like the vocals are solid, but they're kind of in the background. They're not taking up a lot of time on this record. I think they're, in a sense, a little bit of an afterthought. I think this is basically, if this was an instrumental record, it would not be much different than how it is now.
Yeah, let's see. It's I get the sense maybe the vocals were I think the vocals were outsourced to a dude.
On the final song they were. I think it's mostly the main guy.
I see. Yeah,
but
it's definitely not.
I don't get the sense that it's primary. Yeah.
No, it's you know, you got to have some on because it's an extreme music. I appreciate that there are vocals there. You know, like it's good. Yeah, you got to have some parts to rage to. But you know, that's another thing with the record. The vocals are good, but they sound more like a black metal vocal, if anything. And
well, it's Bill Steer's vocals on Necroticism and Heartwork.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, so point being, if there's I mean, this is early in the review to say it, but if there's a limitation to this record, right, it's that it is simply just very contained and punchy, right? It's all coloring within the lines. And for the goregrind, I think, you know, we'd probably both like this a bit better if it more activated the goregrind legacy a bit more. And one way to do that would be you could just keep all the punchy, polished guitar and just put more demented, gory vocals on it. And that would be
great. Yeah,
that would give it the crazy it needs. It's not. This is a very like wild record in some sense. It's very no holds barred. It's very like, it's adventurous. It's unpredictable, and it's often funny in like a not in a lame way. In like a, you know, not in an unintentional way.
He's clearly these guys are having great fun with this music.
Yeah, so it's all of that, but it could use a little bit of like over the top crazy, a little bit of gonzo.
I agree. Yeah, no, it's like I mean, I didn't want to say that because that's like a very kind of personal taste thing. You know, I'll give it up front. It's like, okay, for like gore-centered stuff, especially goregrind, which this is not, but it's accessing the legacy of that, whatever. I like my goregrind very unmusical, very harsh and weird. But the question is, what are these guys trying to access? You know, are you know, listening to the first Pharmacist record, it's like, okay, so we're doing a sort of like old school goregrind meets like mid-era Carcass thing. Okay, that's a fair kind of starting point for a band like this. And then they're going in this direction that is, you know, bringing in more melodic ideas. So what's the ultimate idea of this? I think, of course, because of my opinions, you know, we should keep shit weirder. You know, I think you agree with that. But ultimately, you know, it's like, what's the destiny of the band? Well, it's hard to tell. But real quick, let me do a sample. So Necromorph. This is an outstanding track as a whole. Mm-hmm. But I want to listen to the ending of this song, the last couple minutes. And I want to say, how many cool things can happen in 2 minutes? This will tell you all of it. So yeah, I this is such a fascinating sample to me because, okay, so we got basically a 2-minute sample, and the most essential parts of it are bridges between riffs. The riffs themselves are excellent, of course, but ultimately, what do you remember? Shit like the speed up toward the end. You know, the introduction of the riff and then the big tempo pickup. You know, they
do one more rep when they crank the tempo, and then they're into the thrash riff.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that's really smart because the beginning of the song, they play that kind of death groove riff a lot. Here they reprise it for just 2 bars.
Yeah, no, it's really, there's really sophisticated songwriting stuff going on throughout this record. But it's all tucked away in the bridges. Like, if you just listen riff by riff, this is a very straightforward record. But listening to the ways riffs transition into each other with this brilliant kind of motivic riff writing totally transforms the record. Like, this is such a subtly smart album in the way that it's written. This is, you know, like, if you're a smart guy who's classically trained and you happen to be listening to a low rent podcast like this, listen to this album. You're gonna have a ton to dig out. You know?
Yeah. It's oh, you know, the other thing I was saying during that sample was that you could play this for a Metallica dad. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's part of the this is what normal people think death metal sounds like.
I could play this for my dad and he'd be like, "Dude, how do you play this on guitar? This is cool." You know?
Yeah. You have the dum 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 dum, and then you got the like the fast part on the song. That the palm muted fast part, right? Could be on Harmony Corruption. It could also just be on Master of Puppets.
Yeah, it definitely could. I didn't even think about the Metallica thing until you said it. It's like, dude, this is totally like Metallicable. You know?
That's one of the things. It's like there are some Slayerisms on this, especially on the second track, Corpus Sonica, but they're all kind of mutated into like King Crimson prog intervals.
Yeah.
And it might be that the primary... This might be an interesting and rare case of extreme metal where the primary thrash reference point is Metallica rather than Slayer.
Yeah. Because there's solos all over this record, but they're basically devoid of like Kerry King-isms. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like
although mercifully better than what's the Metallica guy, Kirk Hammett. Yeah. Kirk Hammett solos. Yeah, so that segues pretty well into my next sample, which is it's from the beginning of The Great Contractor, which is a great song title.
I think it would be The Great Contractor, like contracting a disease.
Oh, or like a sort of contracting kind of like orifice.
Either way, so make it more medical.
Yeah. Okay, so, well, either way, I am contractually obliged to sample the part with the big High on Fire riff. Well, I was going to talk about the complex structures there, and guess what? I lost track of it and couldn't even remember where I meant to stop the sample. But the basic thing, the first thing I wanted to point out, right, is, right, the song is structured around this big sort of big chugging kind of really does sound like a High on Fire riff. He does that 4 times, and then he has a B riff, right? Which is this more sort of percussive mid-tempo chug thing, right? And that is also very High on Fire. And he does, so we get a 4A, 4B. And in that B, even just in that B section, each variation of the riff is different in the drumming and in the inflection of the chug.
Yeah.
Then we go back to the A, and when we're back to the A, you heard me saying it on air. The lead starts to get more the vocals. Yeah, there's more action in the vocals and lead there. So it's harder to hear, but the A riff changes when it comes back. And it gets sort of like more dark intervals in there. And then it less bluesy. And then they keep the basic melodic figure of that riff, but I think to a key change or something. And they just go into a huge sprawling guitar solo. And when they drop out of the solo, they're back at the B riff. Right? It's like you setting up an A, 4 of A, 4 of B, 4 of A, guitar solo based on A, whoa, back to the B riff.
Yeah.
Which is smart and economical. These aren't like... These songs don't have like tons of parts, and they're not, 7 minutes is long for gory stuff, but it's not, it's not even black metal long, right? Or not necessarily. But they are, they get a lot of mileage. All sorts of subtle structural variations happening within the format of very direct riff-oriented songs.
Yeah. It's...
Also, that solo at the end fucking killed.
Well, black metal guy, speaking of solos... All right, so you actually informed me that Andrew Lee... from God knows how many bands was involved doing lead guitar on this, right?
Yeah, chiefly Ripped to Shreds, but he's also played on the Azath record we reviewed. Collaborates a lot with Brandon Corsair.
Like first 10 episodes, we covered that
maybe
Azath
first
record?
2 episodes. Like
it was very early. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell. Like on Metal Archives and Bandcamp, it has him as like solo guitars. So I don't know if he does all the solos or just some. It doesn't really matter because the solos on this record are pretty fucking remarkable, really. They're a primary part of this music. And as you know, I'm not a big solo guy, but god damn if the solos on this record aren't outstanding. So I want to go to...
I'm not a big solo guy either. If anything, if anything, I'm more averse to solos than you. But I even had, like, in that song where he just breaks out into the really proggy solo first. It's like, I should hate that, but he pulls it off.
Yeah, exactly. So, I want to go to the title track of Flourishing Extremities on Unspoiled Mental Grounds. And all the riffs on this are great. You know, the beats, the whole vibe of it is excellent, but what really puts it together is 2 solos in this sample here, and this is phenomenal. Dude, those fucking solos, so...
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell based on the promo material if that was Andrew or the main guy behind this band, but either way, like, the way that... You know, I'm so excited about the way it interacts with the riff under it.
Yeah.
Because it's like
it's like really good.
Yeah, it's a complex riff under it, which is where I was saying in the notes. It's like
it says solo guitars by Andrew Lee. He did all of them.
Did he do? Well, it's like I mean,
there's some ambiguity there, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of ambiguous. So you know, whoever's doing it, Andrew Lee. Well, Andrew Lee, we already know is an excellent guitarist. The main guy behind this band, we know is an excellent guitarist based off his riffing. So, let's say, we don't know. Well, either way, the solos on this record are outstanding. And, so, something you were talking about, you know, the way the solos interact with the riffs under them. That gives me a lot of John Levasseur, which is the original lead guitarist for Cryptopsy. The way he would do solos, and usually there would be a new riff introduced underneath them.
Yeah, you've talked about this.
Yeah, that's something that happens on this sample here. That riff underneath these solos, I think, is a whole new riff for this song. And that's amazing, because it gives it a whole new sort of melodic dimension to operate within. And, yeah, it's amazing what an effect that has.
Counterpoint playing between the solo and the riff. The riff is high like, it's not like a good rhythm riff either. It's like a very it's like there are several thematically related riffs happening there, and they're like complex and melodic, right? There are like lots of notes in them, even though they're chug riffs. And they're kind of it's like dense high movement riffing, and that is interwoven with the solo, which I imagine is very difficult to do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's... man, to be able to dovetail that stuff together so well.
Like, they're some of the best... It's not, like... It's some of the best riffs on the album they saved for the solo.